Welcome to the TAS how-to video on shipment services. The shipment services section of TAS allows you to run reports to obtain details on specific shipment scenarios. The reports available in the shipment services are the landed cost estimator, restricted party report, product compliance report, and trade documents. This particular video will focus on only the landed cost estimator, and we will cover the other reports in a separate video. Before we use the landed cost estimator, it is important to know what exactly landed cost is. Landed cost is the term for a total price of a product or a shipment. The total price includes the cost of the commodity, the shipping and insurance charges, as well as any applicable duty, tax, and other related customs fees. Now let's run through our first scenario. To complete our first landed cost scenario, we need to go to the shipment services section. You can either reach that from the drop-down at the top by clicking New Shipment, or click Shipment Services from the home page. Once you click on it, just click Create a New Shipment, and it will take you to the Shipment Services page where you can begin to enter your information for your scenario. The first thing you need to enter, and it's really optional, is a reference number. By default, the TAS application will provide a reference number for you. But it's a good idea to go ahead and include a reference number or even a word that would make sense to you. This allows you to come back to it later on in your history and either review it and identify it more quickly, or even if you want to run a similar scenario using close to the same information but changing only a few, it's quicker to identify it being something that makes sense to you versus a random number that TAS will assign. But again, it's optional and not required. The next thing is, if you're ever not sure what fields are required to complete a particular report, if you click on any one of these links in the required fields section, TAS will highlight with asterisks either the field or the header of all the information that is mandatory to run a particular report. For now, we're just going to focus on landed cost, and I'll walk you through what's required to do that. To complete a landed cost, at minimum you have to include the origin and destination country. You'll notice that in the case of the origin country or the shipper, it's already populated with the US. This is because this is what I registered in my profile for TAS. But if I want to change that, I can just replace the country code. If I don't know it, I can click select a country and then choose a different country. For this purpose though, I'm going to go ahead and leave US as my origin. Next, we got to choose our receiver country. Again, if you know the code, you can plug it in, or you can click select country, find your country. In this case, we'll say we're going to Australia. And that is at minimum from a shipper and receiver perspective that you have to enter. The rest of the information can be completed if you choose, but it's not required for the landed cost, but they will be used in other reports that we'll cover in a later video. Next, we need to give it the financial details of our shipment. So by default, again, because of my profile, it knows that I have United States dollar as my currency value. I can go ahead and change that to any of the other known currencies. Just choose the option that works for you. If you happen to know your transportation, insurance, and brokerage charges already, you can directly data enter them now. But in the event that you don't know your transportation charge, you can click the Calculate My Transportation Charges box. And then if you notice down here, a new little field opens up where you can actually obtain your transportation charge. What it'll do is, if you've included a DHL account number in your profile, it will automatically pull that over here. Notice mine's blank because I do not currently have one loaded. You can complete the rest of the shipment information, and then once done, click Get Transportation Costs, and then TAS, using your DHL account number, will obtain your account-based rates and plug that information up here. For the purpose of this scenario, though, I'll go ahead and manually enter in my transportation cost. So in this case, we'll go ahead and say I'm sending something, and it's going to be $250 to send. I'm going to go ahead and say my value for insurance, pick a high value, and say it's $1,000. And in this case, we'll say I'm not sure what the brokerage charges are, so I'm going to leave those blank for now. The next bit of information that we need to include is actually what we're sending. So in the products to be shipped section, if you've never used TAS before, or you're sending a new commodity, you want to leave the drop down as new product. If you happen to ship something before, you'll notice that you can go ahead and select a previous commodity, but we'll cover that in a separate scenario later on. For now, we'll leave it as new product, and we'll go ahead and click Add. And this opens the Add Product screen. So the first thing that we'll see is that we need to give some information about the actual product that we're sending. The first field, ID, is an optional field. It's not required, but it's helpful for later on if you're going to be sending either similar commodities, or if you have a lot of commodities that you try to identify through other means like a SKU or a reference number. Plugging that in here greatly helps you identify exactly what it is you're sending, so you don't always have to go and classify the particular product again. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and leave it blank. And for our description of the commodity we're sending, we'll go ahead and say we're sending coffee, and the country it was made in was Colombia. And again, if you're not sure of the country code, you can use the select country option to find your country. The next thing we have to do is tell it the classification code, or in this case, the HS code. You'll notice that there's two options, one for the import HS code and one for the export. In the case of the US, Schedule B number. In most other countries, it is also an HS code. The export number is not required in order to do a landed cost. In some of the other reports, it's good information to include, but it is not a required that you include that information, just the import code, so that the the customs charges can be calculated. If you happen to know the HS code, you can just enter it here. But in this case, we'll go ahead and use the classifier to find it. So we'll click Find Code, and it opens up the interactive classifier. If you're not familiar with the classifier, please see our other video on TAS resources that goes into greater detail on exactly how the classifier works. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and proceed, and we'll go ahead and say search for our keyword, which is coffee. I'm going to go ahead and go straight down to the chapter that coffee is under, and I'll proceed to select all of the classifications to get to my specific commodity. Again, if you've seen the classifier video, you'll know to click select this, and it's going to go ahead and populate the classification code into the field. You'll also notice that there's a section called product properties. In this case, there are no additional properties that have to be provided for our classification, but depending on the commodity or the country, additional information might be required, and TAS will know this and prompt you for it. Things such as weight or volume might be required to further classify the commodity. It'll prompt you for that. You would provide that information in order to proceed. Once I'm done adding all the key information, I can click Add to Shipment, and then TAS will go ahead and populate that commodity under the products to be shipped section right here. If I happen to have another commodity that I'm sending in this shipment, I can either add it, a new product just like we did, or I can add a previously existing one. For this scenario though, we'll go ahead and leave it alone as just the one. Now I need to give it some key information about the commodity. What's the quantity that I'm sending, and what's the price per unit? In this case, we'll go ahead and say I'm sending 10 units, and we'll value them at $100 a piece. And this way, this actually equals up to our insurance charge. They don't have to equal up because insurance charges don't necessarily always equal to the price of the commodities, but for simplistic sake, we're going to go ahead and do that this time. Once I've completed the quantity and the price per unit, I've provided all the information TAS needs in order to calculate my landed cost. So I can go ahead and click my landed cost estimate, and then TAS will run its scenario using the information of the transportation charge, the insurance charge, and all the commodity information you've included to determine what the landed cost is going to be. So when we get on the landed cost report, the first thing we're going to see is a summary of all the information we've essentially provided TAS. So what was the shipment value, the transportation charge, insurance charge, and brokerage charge. It also breaks out a new thing called the estimated fees, which is just calculated based on this information. And here, in this section right here, is where we get our total landed cost. So everything involved with this shipment, from the cost of the actual commodity all the way through the transportation and shipping charges, what's the cost involved to get this shipment from A to B. If we scroll down, we see there's another section that, called landed cost details. This is where it'll break out all the actual specific information as it relates to the custom charges such as duty, VAT, and other taxes and fees that may be associated with sending a commodity into a particular country. In this case, we can see it's going to reiterate our commodity details back to us. So we have our description of coffee, the value and the quantity that we were sending and the net value. In this case, there were only potentially two customs fees that were associated, duty and GST, so goods and services tax. If we notice under duty, there is a zero amount, so there actually wasn't anything assessed, but there was under GST. So in addition to just telling you what the total value of the applied fee is, TAS will also indicate or give you the option to see how it arrived at that information. So if you put your cursor over the amount, you'll notice it'll highlight, and if I click on it, here's where it tells us what formula it took to arrive at the amount. So in the case of the GST, it was 10% of the cost, insurance, freight, and had there been any duty, that would have been included as well. So this just helps you understand how it arrived at the value that it's providing. And then again, it's going to total everything up to the right, and if we had multiple commodities, it would list all of those with a grand total of the estimated fees. This completes our first scenario on how to run a landed cost. This was a simplistic single commodity. Now we will take you through how to add additional commodities and also how to use previously shipped commodities. So to do that, you can do one of several things. You can either go straight up to Shipment Services and click New Shipment, or you'll notice at the bottom that you can either click Start with a blank shipment, or if you're going to do something similar, like maybe ship coffee again, but at a different quantity or a different value, or maybe to a different country, you can click Create a New Shipment with this data. For the purposes of this demonstration, that's what we're going to go ahead and do to save us on some of the data entry time. So we'll go ahead and click Create New Shipment with this data. And so TAS will take us back actually to the Shipment Services screen that we began with, but this time a lot of our information will already be pre-populated. So if we notice, Australia is already indicated as our destination. Our freight charges are the same, as is the classification for coffee. So in this case, we'll just add an additional commodity to see how we can do that. So in this case, because we're going to add additional commodities, most likely the transportation charges are going to increase because it'll be a heavier weight. So we'll bump that up to 400. And then in addition to coffee, we'll go ahead and ship one of our previously sent commodities. We'll say sugar. So I just need to select that and click Add. So TAS will go ahead and take sugar from the previous time that we sent it, and it will populate it into the products to be shipped screen. You'll notice though that when I added sugar, it didn't indicate the HS code. It says no classification codes. This is because although I have used sugar in a previous scenario, it wasn't to Australia as the destination. So TAS will remember that, and it'll flag that for you so that you know that you need to add the classification code. So to do that on an already existing product, you can actually just click on the commodity itself. The product window will open similar to what we've seen before, and now I can make the necessary changes. So I can either change the country of origin if it's not coming from the US, maybe it's coming from a different country. It'll remember all the previous countries you've used that commodity in. So previously I used it for India, and you can see that it remembers the classification code here. So now I can go ahead and just tell it to find my classification code again. So in this case, the classifier will pop up. I can click search, and then I can go through and find the right commodity. So in this case, I'll just kind of scroll through until I reach my final commodity. And then I can click save, and then TAS will refresh. And now in addition to coffee with its classification code, I now have sugar with its classification code. Just as before, I need to provide a commodity quantity. So in this case, we'll say 20, and this time we'll say the cost of each one was 25. So now that I've provided all of that information, I can go ahead and click Landed Cost. Just a side note, if I ever add anything that I don't want or made a mistake on, you can just check the box next to it and then click Delete the selected, and it'll remove that commodity from the products to be shipped, and then you can add or modify whatever you need. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave both, and now I'll click View Landed Cost again. It'll run the scenario, and now I'll be able to see, now that I've had additional commodities in there, what am I looking at? So in this case, it's ran it for coffee and sugar. It's breaking down the duty and the GST just as it did before. Now in the case of sugar, for Australia, there was no duty or GST assessed. It still highlights because you can always click and see what the potential formula would be if there was any. In this case, it's telling me that the de minimis applies, meaning that the amount for that product didn't reach the threshold for Australia to assess a duty amount. So you can still kind of see all the formulas and how TAS arrived at that information. But notice that it's kind of zeros across the board, and again, it totals it up for you. So similar to what we saw before, it'll just continue to list all the additional products that you ship. And then again, I can either create a new shipment with the similar data, or I can start brand new by clicking Start on a Blank Shipment. This concludes our Shipment Services Landed Costs video. Please look for our other videos that will outline the remaining reports of Restricted Party Report, Product Compliance Report, and shipment documents, as well as how to use the history of the shipment services to pull up previously ran scenarios. Thank you.